Good afternoon. The Committee on the Subcommittee on Wildlife and Oceans will now restart. And I would like to call on the third panel to please be seated at the witness table. Is that all there is? Just two?
Oh, we're missing someone. Where's Ms. Madonna?
Thank you. I'd like to introduce the members of the third panel who will testify this afternoon. John Williams, Executive Director of the Southern Shrimp Alliance, Mr. Ryan Lambert of the Cajun Fishing Adventures, and Ms. Joanne McDonough, Nature Tourism Specialist, Alabama Gulf Coast Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Ann Rolfes, Executive Director of the Louisiana Bucket Brigade. Is Ms. McDonough in the room? Oh, all right, fine. Okay. Well, we'll begin with Mr. Williams. And again, I think you've been seated here all morning, so you do know that we have a time limit. The red light will flash on, but we will accept your full written statement into the record. So, Mr. Williams, thank you for being here today, and thank you for the long wait you've had. But we knew this was going to be a long hearing. So please begin.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to address the Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill's impact on the shrimp industry. I am the Executive Director of the Southern Shrimp Alliance, and I'm also a shrimper. Our organization was founded over 8 years ago to represent the shrimp industry in the Gulf and South Atlantic. Thousands of people currently make their living shrimping off of our southern coast. In recent years, we have survived regulatory shutdowns, high fuel prices, low shrimp prices, and massive hurricanes. I have to believe that somehow we will survive this disaster as well. But let's make no mistake about it. The impacts on the shrimp fishery will be cataclysmic. Every day brings a bewildering flood of new information. The truth is, we don't know what the full extent of the damage will be, and it will be years before we do. I would like to focus today on 3 areas for moving forward where I think Congress and this administration should work together. First, the oil spill compensation process for shrimp fishermen must be fair and efficient. As you know, the spill has completely shut down a significant portion of our industry. Fishermen face a very uncertain future and cannot wait for relief. When shrimpers ask what they can do, I honestly don't know what to tell them. The Oil Pollution Act says that fishermen will be made whole for their economic damages. But if you speak to shrimpers in the Gulf, confusion reigns. Even the president is now making statements recognizing that this system appears to be fundamentally broken. This situation is completely unacceptable. Congress and the administration must either use existing authority to streamline the current process or establish a new one that is tailored to the magnitude of this spill. Despite lessons learned from Exxon Valdez, history is about to repeat itself. The lawyers will get rich and the fishermen will go broke. Congress can fix this problem. My second point is U.S. shrimp currently being sold in the marketplace is safe, wholesome, and healthy. This message is absolutely crucial if we are to survive this crisis. The growing misconception that Gulf shrimp is not safe is untrue and unacceptable. We greatly appreciate the efforts of NOAA and FDA to test seafood and inform the public that seafood from the Gulf is safe. But obviously, much more must be done to ensure that this message is heard and understood. It appears that the government's seafood testing and safety efforts are being done without significant industry participation. A stronger partnership between industry and the federal government is needed. A good first step would be the creation of a joint task force with the fishing industry and the government charged with minimizing the impact of the oil spill on the Gulf seafood market. Funding a consumer education program regarding the safety and health attributes of Gulf seafood would also be helpful. My final point is that a more formal partnership between the fishing industry and the government should be established. History has taught us that fishermen bear the economic brunt of the damage from oil spills, and the oil companies do everything they can to minimize their responsibilities. This spill will be no different. Our survival depends on the responsiveness of our government, and I must say that fishermen are losing confidence. Every day, fishermen ask me if our government is really working for us. Everything about this spill seems to be downplayed by one federal official after another, and there is widespread perception that the government is not being responsive to even the most basic environmental, economic, and health concerns. On May 5th, we sent a letter to EPA and NOAA voicing strong concerns regarding the impact of the chemical dispersants used by BP on marine life, including shrimp. We have not received any response to these concerns. Meanwhile, credible scientists have echoed our concerns, and yet BP has continued to apply another 1 million gallons of dispersants. As we understand it, government officials made a decision that harm caused by oil spread throughout the water column was preferable to allowing oil to rise and remain on the surface. Both NOAA and EPA have described their decision as simply an environmental trade-off. To date, no one in our government has taken the time to sit down with us to explain why our shrimp industry became a national trade-off. The use of dispersants is symptomatic of the need for a much stronger and more constructive partnership between the administration and the fishing industry. This spill will impact the shrimp industry for a long time, yet government's actions will be drawn away to another important issue soon after the spill is capped. Before our fishermen are forgotten, it is vitally important that systems be established now that will remain in place for the long term to help the fishing industry recover. A commission should be created to, 1, advise Congress and the administration of the continuing impacts of the spill as they are discovered and documented. 2, formulate specific recommendations as to an appropriate responses to adverse impacts. And 3, provide regular reports on the progress of efforts to provide fair compensation to fishermen for economic harm caused by the spill. In closing, I would like to say that while our fishermen are suffering, nothing we face can ever be measured against the personal tragedy of the families, of the loved ones, and those who perished on the Deepwater Horizon rig. I just want to recognize them and let them know that they are in our prayers. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Williams, for your testimony this afternoon, and I believe we have a heightened appreciation for your situation. Mr. Lambert, I look forward to your testimony, and you may now proceed.
Thank you, Madam Bordayo. My name is Ryan Lambert, and I'm a charter fishing guide out of Buras, Louisiana, ground zero for the Horizon Oil Spill. I'm a member of Ducks Unlimited, CCA, and I sit on the board of directors for the Charter Boat Association. And I wrote a pretty speech, but I'm not going to use it. I'm going to go personal and ground zero, if you will, bring it down to layman's terms. When people ask me, what is the impact you've had on the oil spill, you know, the only thing I could tell them is to take everything that you know from school to fundraising to being a speaker, in one day, all of that is useless. They say experience is invaluable. Well, right now it's worthless. Because when I pull up to the dock, I can look at the water level. I can look at the wind direction, where the tide is. I know right where to go to catch what kind of fish. I know where to go for what duck, because I'm a passionate duck hunter and duck guide as well. And right now, all that's worthless. So the first thing I thought about was, you know, the 11 families when it first happened. You know, I had no idea that I would be impacted. I said, these poor guys are just making a living, and they lost their life doing so, supporting their families. But a few days later, when it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it started coming into us, and the reporters started showing up, and they wanted us to take them to the oil. Well, we take them out, but no one would find the oil. And this went on, and then all of a sudden they found someone past Salutra where everybody did their photo ops. And after 47 days, and people still having trouble, I mean, experienced guides that know the water and having trouble finding the oil, I said, I'm going to take a trip myself. So throw my old black lab in the boat. And I figured I'd go to a restoration project about 90 miles away from the spill, because I knew it had a hard beach there, and whatever was floating up, I would find. And on the way, you know, I saw a couple of oil sheens and got a little closer. I could see a few pelicans that were just starting to turn a little rusty on the breast. And upon reaching the beach, everything looked fairly normal. And I walked 2 or 3 miles down the beach, and I started noticing clams, more shells than there normally are. And upon looking closer, they were actually fingernail clams, which drum and ducks and everything, that's the start of all life. And I said, why are there so many? And I got closer to the water, because the water is real murky from the river being high. It's at 13.2. It just crested last week. And when I got down to the water, there are millions and millions of what they call moose, these tar balls in the surf. And they're just going back and forth and washing back and forth. They had a couple on those photo ops that they see on the beach, but there are millions of them, and they're all encrusted with these shells. And these are things that people don't see, and so 3 days later, I go back on day number 50, and I go to that beach, and as far as you can see, for miles and miles, there's oil and millions and millions of tar balls, and all the aquatic grasses that are caught up in that, and some various, the pelicans were having a harder time, and they were kind of teetering as they flew. And I thought, why are there no booms here? Why are there no people working? You see 50 people standing on the tent in Grand Isle where the TV cameras are. It's out of sight, out of mind, and that's why the dispersants were used. And the only reason I'm seeing all this is because it's a secluded beach that only someone like myself would go to. So when I look off to the east, I see Chinooks and Blackhawks ferrying sandbags back and forth, trying to stop the gaps because we didn't take the time to build the restoration projects like the one I was standing on. And now we're vulnerable. Now they're spending millions and millions of dollars trying to fill those breaches with sandbags. And now we're talking about spending $350 million to build the berms when we should have spent it already to protect Louisiana. Because if we had a solid beach, all this would come on the beach, we'd suck it up, we'd go about our business. But now, further down, closer to the spill, millions of those tar balls, they're not floating, they're underwater because of the dispersants. People can't see them. And the whole marsh is going to be filled with that. And every invertebrate, every crustacean, everything that every larva and fish egg is going to be encrusted on those things, and they're all going to die. And we'll lose a few year classes because Mother Nature tends to heal herself. I know that. But on the way back, I captured a pelican that was, I ran it down and I jumped out and I grabbed it, and I was going to bring it to the rescue center. I'm running short on time. I have a lot to say. And that moose was all over its beak, and as they preened to clean itself, they just spread it everywhere. And what's going to happen come August, and the oil's still supposed to be leaking then, is the migration of waterfowl will come down. We're talking about 15 million ducks and geese will be coming through Louisiana. And the very nature of these ducks, the way their act is, a lot of them are dabblers, and they'll be feeding. And as they have their beak down in that stuff, it's going to get all over it. And it's so sticky, when they preen, then they won't be able to fly. Then, where we're at, they raft up in tens of thousands offshore where the slicks are, where the big slicks are. So that's going to be detrimental as well. And then it's a threefold deal because as probably 100,000 of them will winter in my area, 15 million will pass through and go to Central America, Nicaragua, Honduras. And there won't be a food source because that oil is killing the aquatics and the invertebrates, so they won't be able to sustain themselves to get across the Gulf. And if we lose half of the Mississippi flyway, the economic impact will be gross from Alaska to Canada, all through Wisconsin, Minnesota, all through the Mississippi Delta. I mean, people won't be able to duck hunt for years, and it'll be unbelievable. So, there's very little that we can do short of opening up the river to make nature flush itself out and help with that. So, I tell people, no matter what, I'll fish come hell or high water. Well, Katrina put 24 feet of water in my life, so I've already seen the high water. Now I'm afraid of what I'm going to deal with now. Thank you for letting me testify and share my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambert, for sharing your experience with us. We appreciate it. And now we will have questions for the panelists later. We will now turn to Ms. McDonough. Welcome to the subcommittee, and please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and fellow committee members, for the invitation to testify here concerning the importance of nature tourism in the Gulf of Mexico region. I serve as a nature tourism specialist with the Alabama Gulf Coast Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. We work closely with nature tour operators to educate people about the importance of environmental ethics and stewardship of the Gulf of Mexico natural resources. Nature tourism may be simply defined as visiting natural landscapes to enjoy scenery and view wildlife at home and around the world. This industry relies profoundly on healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. Tourism is the world's largest industry, and nature tourism its fastest growing sector. A national survey conducted in 2006 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service revealed that $22 billion was spent on hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing just in the Gulf Coast region. Watching wildlife generated $6 billion. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are sustained mainly by small businesses whose profits circulate through local coastal communities throughout the Gulf of Mexico. Alabama and Mississippi include 966 miles of estuarine shoreline, with 98 miles of Gulf front beaches. Alabama's sugar white beaches attracted more than 4 million tourists in 2009, generating more than $3 billion into the coastal communities of Baldwin and Mobile counties. Nearly $2 billion of that was generated just between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Before the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe, a fleet of vessels in Orange Beach, Alabama were capable of carrying hundreds of thousands of tourists to the fertile breeding grounds of wild bottlenose dolphin. 31 captains and crew are trained by the Dolphin Smart program that promotes the sustainable viewing of dolphin in their natural habitat. Today, they are idle at the dock. Phones are silent. Before oil began coating Louisiana wetlands, in Mississippi, kayak paddles were scheduled to dip into the Pascagoula River, the last remaining free-flowing river in our nation. Certified coastal nature guides in Alabama were booking kayak tours through cypress gum swamps, emerging into the Mobile Tensile Delta, one of the largest intact wetland ecosystems in the United States. Sailing charters were ready to ply the nutrient-rich waters of Mobile Bay, a national estuary, and the second largest intact river delta system in the nation. Their phones are ringing, only with cancellations. The nature of our coasts along the Gulf of Mexico is critical to our nation's economy, our natural heritage, our cultural integrity. Our natural assets not only afford destinations for leisure, our barrier islands are the first line of defense for storm resilience. Our maritime forests play a vital role in providing clean air. Oyster reefs and seagrass beds provide clean water and safe food. Just as these habitats suffer untold losses due to this catastrophe, so will entire generations of people in the Gulf Coast communities. A toxic tide assaults our shores every day. I carry an urgent plea from tour operators and coastal residents. BPU response efforts are slow, inadequate, and disorganized. We need jobs. Out-of-state workers are being hired for jobs the local workforce could perform. I bring personal stories with me, and Captain Chris Nelson echoes their concerns. These are his words. I have always been a realist, not a pessimist, but when it came to our beautiful natural wildlife, I was an optimist. Today, I cannot claim that. I have lost hope. With your help, we can make sure wildlife will have clean homes, restore nature tourism, and bring back hope for coastal residents like Captain Chris. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. fellow committee members for your efforts in addressing this man-made disaster. Recommendations are in my written testimony, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. McDonough, for describing the very concerning state of coastal tourism. And finally, on our third panel, I welcome to the subcommittee Ms. Rolfes. Please begin.
My name is Ann Rolfes, and 10 years ago, I founded a nonprofit organization called the Louisiana Bucket Brigade to work with people who live next to oil refineries and chemical plants. For the past decade, I've spent a lot of time on the front porches of people who live right next to the oil industry, as close as I am to you right now. From this vantage point, I've seen all kinds of things, and I am not at all surprised that we have had such a terrible catastrophe. We are only lucky that it hasn't happened more often and sooner than this disaster in the Gulf. I could walk you into the file room. This is actual data, not opinion. I could walk you into the file room at the Department of Environmental Quality and the EPA and show you permits and variances and accident reports that would make your hair stand on end. It's not just the oil rigs that have a problem, it's the oil industry. That's refineries, it's pipelines, and other infrastructure. The dynamic that we are seeing playing out in the Gulf is one that I have seen every week for the last 10 years. The permit applications are not meaningful examinations of the work at hand, but instead they are cut and paste quick jobs. And when there is an accident like we have just seen, there is a very predictable series of events that happens. Number one, downplay the problem. Number two, blame somebody else. Number three, minimize the impact on those hardest hit. And number four, resist the federal government and attempts at enforcement with every breath of the corporation's body. If this sounds familiar, it's exactly what is happening in the Gulf right now, and we know the outcome. We know, as with the Exxon Valdez and with many other accidents in Louisiana that never make the headlines, we know that what happens is that maybe, after years and decades, a very wealthy oil company finally gives money to the people who it has damaged. But this is always much, much too late. My question is, since we know what's going to happen here, why can't this time be different? And that is why I am here today. I was at lunch and I picked up Roll Call, your newspaper, and there's an ad from BP, just like the ones we see in the New Orleans papers. And it says that our focus has been on helping fishermen by making payments to replace their lost monthly income. I know of one payment. So this ad, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely not true. And the fact that they can put it in the newspaper under your very noses, I think speaks volumes to the power of the oil industry and the real need for y'all to get engaged. And so to that extent, as far as encouraging federal and congressional involvement, the following areas are ones in which we desperately need federal intervention. The first is on wildlife. I think other people more knowledgeable than I have spoken. The second is health. I think we all heard the stories, I don't know if they made the rounds in D.C., of workers who were out on boats cleaning up the oil and then became ill from the odors. They were told by BP not only could they not wear respirators, but they would absolutely be fired if they wore them. How can this be? Why isn't OSHA out on those boats with monitors? I've heard subsequently that OSHA said they've been monitoring and there is no problem. No, what it shows is that OSHA is not monitoring effectively because you have scores of cleanup workers who have been made sick. Where is the Department of Labor? Where is the Department of Justice to step in right now and tell BP that they are not allowed to give directives like that? How is it that an oil company is more powerful than the federal government? I don't understand. In addition to the problems of the cleanup workers, when I sat in the airport on the way here, I went through piles of messages from people who were calling my tiny organization asking about exposure. They're sick with respiratory illnesses when they have never been sick before. Again, there's something wrong here when a small nonprofit agency is seen as more responsive than the federal government. The third area where we need your intervention is with the economy. Our fishing guide here can speak volumes to that, but there's been a lot, even from our own congressman, about the balance that has to be struck between the oil industry and the fishing industry and wildlife. I'm here to tell you that it is absolutely not balanced. It is so far in favor of the oil industry, and I think that these ads in the paper and even our own representative statements really prove that point. We agree we need balance. We need to have some sort of ecological and environmental health protections. Right now, what's happening is that the oil companies are externalizing their costs on the backs of Louisiana residents. Certainly, the fishermen and the shrimpers and all the indirect people who make their livings off of this industry need to be made whole, and BP should not be allowed to get away with false statements like this. The final area where we need government intervention is in the area of information control and management. BP is absolutely controlling media access to destroyed places, as well as scientists and non-governmental organization access. How is it that they can prevent the documentation, which will in the end prevent their liability? There are no databases currently that can tell you how many accidents there have been in the Gulf. There are no databases run by the government that can tell you how many accidents the oil industry has had over the long term. This is a basic tool that ought to be used. I mean, why doesn't EPA, for goodness sakes, have a database, and NOAA and MMS have a database where anybody can go and look at this information? There are absolutely things that we can do to correct this problem. I'm not a cynical person, and I want to believe that since we've seen all of this before, that this time can be different, and I hope that y'all can make it so.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And I want to say that everything that's been said this afternoon on this panel 3 has been very valuable to our committee. One question I'm just going to ask before I start with my questions, and I'd like to welcome the ranking member, Mr. Cassidy, back. I know he's got questions as well. I keep thinking about the Hurricane Katrina and how disorganized that was following the hurricane. I remember watching on TV, I think some National Guard general jumped up on a truck and says, "I'm in charge." Now, the incident commander in this case is supposed to be someone from the Coast Guard. Is that correct?
Yes. Tad Allen.
All right. Is everybody aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Are they really indeed in charge? They are. They step right up to the plate. They're the ones you go to when you see all this, because several of you in your testimonies and prior to this panel have said things are disorganized.
I think BP is in charge. And when I've spoken with people from the government, including the EPA administrator herself, I was told, I was expressing the opinion that sure, BP needs to pay, but why should they be administering all of the response? And what I was told was that the Oil Pollution Act says that if BP is going to pay, then they have to run things also. I don't know if that's true or not, but in my estimation, I think the response is certainly better than Katrina. I don't think there's any question about that, but in my opinion, BP is absolutely running this show.
Well, in any disaster, any incident, somebody has got to be the top gun. And if they assign the Coast Guard, then they're the people that you have to go to, and then they in turn can direct you in other directions. But someone has to be on the top directing. And several of you here said that things are disorganized, even to this day.
That's true.
So that's something maybe the committee will have to look into that. Now, I have questions for Mr. Williams. As a member of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, I'm deeply concerned about the impacts of this oil spill on Vietnamese Americans, many of whom participate in the shrimp industry in the Gulf. Do you think outreach to these communities about the Vessels of Opportunity program and the claims process has been adequate?
I think wouldn't know if I would call it adequate, but I know that there has been some outreach to these communities through our organization. We have several of the Vietnamese American communities as members in our organization, and we certainly reach out to these folks as we do with everyone. I don't know as far as a government outreach. I couldn't speak to that, but I think they have been informed to a degree.
Well, one of our colleagues was here this morning, and he was concerned about this, and so I thought I would ask that of you so we have it on the record then. Now, BP has repeatedly stated that it will pay all legitimate claims, yet it has never expounded on what is and is not a legitimate claim. How does this lack of certainty impact those in the shrimp industry?
It causes a lot of confusion with the Oil Pollution Act and the opportunity to file a lawsuit through a class action. It causes a lot of confusion. The members and members of the industry, they don't know what to do. But when BP is making statements, they will pay all legitimate acts, but they don't define what a legitimate claim. They don't define what a legitimate claim is. I think it causes a lot of confusion, and I think it's going to cause confusion because they won't go further than we'll pay all legitimate claims. What do you consider a legitimate claim? Once again, they will say, we pay all legitimate claims. So it's causing confusion right now amongst the industry.
Well, the full committee on natural resources has had a hearing where the BP executives were here, and they stated over and over again that they were going to pay this and pay that. And now I'm hearing that there's only been some token checks issued for $5,000 to the fishery industry, and they want to know, or they're waiting for the claims to be, have those claims been issued? These papers to...
I'm not sure if all or any claims have been paid in full. I think the $5,000 is sort of a down payment on your claim.
The token payment, yes.
Yeah, until it's resolved at a later date.
Well, that's not a lot of money, $5,000, in a situation like this. And some of these fishery companies have several employees. Am I correct on that? I mean,
yeah, as 22 families work out of my lodge alone.
That's right.
And the legitimate claim, the Oil Pollution Act says that they're liable to pay net profit. So net profit is far from what your real expenses, fixed expenses are. And also, what they're waiting for, and why, in my opinion, they're stalling, is that every one of the shrimpers and fishermen that are working in the spill, whatever they make goes to help mitigate the loss of BP. So if they owe me $1 million and I work all year long cleaning up oil and I make $900,000, they only owe me $100,000. Which why should they be able to mitigate their losses and use us as free labor?
That's right. Also, now you don't know then if any documents, claim documents, have been issued to any of these people.
What they've done the first time you go in, you file your claim, they give you a $5,000 check on the spot. Then shortly thereafter, like myself, they'll put me in a big claims file, and they called the house this week and said, we want a profit and loss statement every 15 days. Now, I don't do that for myself, and I'm sure not going to make my CPA do it for them. I do quarterlies. But all they're trying to do is, if news media is staying at my lodge, they want to use that money to mitigate their loss again. They took and put me out of the very thing I do for a living, and if I go to Walmart and I'm a checker and I make $50,000, that comes off of what they owe me. That's ridiculous.
All right, so setting aside the $5,000 token payment, has there been any claims paid?
Not so much as claims right now. There's another $5,000 in the mail, and it comes with...
Yeah, that's two. I understand there were two.
Yeah, it hadn't got there yet, but it's in the mail.
I see. But no claims payment, to your knowledge, have been made?
I think there was one offer, 60% of his gross, I think they offered one guy.
Well, this is something we'll have to investigate. I have a question then for Mr. Lambert. Yes. On Tuesday, BP announced that it would donate the net revenue from recovered oil from the well to create a new wildlife fund. For what restoration activities should this fund be used?
I think all the money should go to Quirpa and restore our coastline and open up the natural channels of the river and bring it back to where it was. When I first started guiding between the levee and the Gulf of Mexico, 6.3 miles, that was solid grasslands and solid estuary. Now there's not one blade of grass in that 6.3 miles. When I leave the dock, I could close my eyes, turn loose of the steering wheel, and I won't hit anything. It's 4 foot deep. We need to restore Louisiana, and Mother Nature will take care of the wildlife herself.
Ms. McDonough, has there been adequate training for tour operators to participate in the Vessels of Opportunity program?
Yes, there has. And some of the tour operators have been in the Vessel of Opportunity program, but some, when I left recently, they were put deactivated.
Deactivated?
So, and what I'm hearing from them is that they're now circulating vessels, but there are still vessels in our waters that are not local. And they're waiting in line and being deactivated.
Mm-hmm. All right, and one more question, and we'll turn it over to the ranking member. How can data collected by your organization be better integrated to guide oil spill response and recovery activities? This is for Ms. Rolfes.
There is no central. We have gathered oil spill data about refinery problems and oil spills and explosions. It's all from the record, from the records from refineries to the states and to the EPA. So certainly what we have is public information that's on our website. I think the issue is, where is that amalgamation of data on oil spills? I mean, it wouldn't take an agency very long to just put together a database with all of the inspection information as well as all of the spill information. It's just a matter of a few people sitting down and entering it into spreadsheets and then having a database that can be searchable. Without this kind of database, nobody, not a congressperson, not a citizen, not even the oil companies, can understand their comprehensive accident history. When we released our database, we actually had ExxonMobil ask a local reporter what we found. And all we did was put their own data together. I mean, they just don't have a comprehensive understanding. And if they did, it might help with prevention.
Someone mentioned there was nobody from OSHA around.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah. When these workers were sick, it's unbelievable. I mean, the workers, and I'm sure you probably have friends who were made sick on these vessels when they're cleaning up. They're told they would be fired, and yet the answer from OSHA is that everything is normal. Well, they're not out on the boats monitoring where they ought to be. Every boat that goes out with cleanup workers ought to have monitoring on it. Right. To me, that's just common sense.
All right, thank you. And now I recognize Mr. Cassidy.
Mr. Williams, I came in late, and I may have missed it as I scanned your testimony. But when we spoke yesterday, you had kind of a novel way of getting shrimpers back out in the Gulf shrimping. Do you want to explain that? Do you recall that?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
Yesterday, I don't have my glasses on, so if it looks like I'm peering out into the distance, I am.
That's okay.
I met with about shrimpers perhaps getting a guarantee of a certain amount of money to return to shrimping. It'll be a flat guarantee if they go out and they don't get anything, their costs are met, but ideally they'll go back out there and find something in the areas that are not closed off. Am I getting that right, or am I totally confused?
Maybe I'm confused. I don't recall that.
No problem.
Okay.
Now, ma'am, as regards the paddle trips in the Pascagoula, there's not oil in the Pascagoula River, so is this perception that is causing the paddling to be canceled?
Yes, sir. Yes, and and coastal Mississippi I mean, the whole Gulf appears awash. And there are still some areas that tour operators could be getting their summer clients down, but there is a perception that it's everywhere. And
So part of what we have to do, because Mr. Voisin, who spoke about oysters earlier, spoke about how most of his oysters are still good, but there's a perception that they're not good. I suspect Mr. Lambert could take me someplace I could still catch my limit of speckled trout.
Yeah, I have 10 boats running today, but that's the first trip in 2 weeks due to the fact that 99% of our trips are canceled. And the only reason this trip is they've been coming with me for years, and they said, we're coming even if you have to get some pigs in a band, we're coming. So just support is all it was.
But you're able to take them to some place where they can catch fish that you can actually eat.
I have 10% of my water still open, and we're just utilizing what we have, and I won't shut down until they shut me down.
Okay. So as much as anything, what we need to come out of here is a understanding that although there's a terrible problem, that for many people with viable businesses, the Gulf is open, and they can take their paddle trips in the Pascagoula, and they can eat the shrimp, trusting that the FDA, the USDA, et cetera, are inspecting those and making sure they're safe. And so we want to avoid a man-made economic disaster on top of the man-made economic disaster. Does that make sense?
Well, problem being is when they close the waters, they'll say at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, this area is closed, and I only have one area left. And if they do that while people eating dinner, I said, fellas, we just got closed. Y'all can't fish tomorrow. There's too much logistics on getting there and getting the people together in order to make it happen. So they just cancel.
Yes. Okay. So it's the uncertainty of it as much as anything. Ms. Rolfs, what I'm told by the EPA folks is that the benzenes, the aromatic amino acids, are quickly evaporated when they hit the water. That there is an air quality issue in the immediate area where the stuff is bubbling up, but certainly by the time it gets to the beach, that the volatile organic chemicals have dissipated. And what's left, for example, the weathered tar ball, I specifically ask about that, is basically inert with nothing left that could harm you. They don't, except dermatitis and irritation of the skin. They don't recommend bathing in it, but at the same time, they say no special equipment is required to scoop up. So is your concern with the beach activity, or is your concern with the folks actually going out testing near the explosion site?
It's with both. Certainly the cleanup workers are a concern, but there are other activities that do impact air quality. For example, when there have been burn-offs on the ocean, as there were early in this spill, the impacts were felt. I think probably bureaus, y'all could probably smell things. And people continue to smell what they believe to be oil and gas. And although the hope certainly is that it would volatilize and that it wouldn't affect people, I think that actual experience is proving to be quite different from that. The problem is that what we ought to do is just have air monitoring to figure this out one way or the other, right? But the monitoring, it's not dissimilar to the dispersant issue. There is a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know about the exposure to these chemicals, low level over the long term. But more than that, the EPA is not monitoring in the right places. They're not doing hotspot monitoring at the moment when people smell it. They do have probably the most comprehensive air sampling program that we've ever seen in this part of the world, and I applaud them for that effort. But we need to have good monitors in bureaus when people are smelling the bad things, because what happens is people are exposed, they smell oil because they're burning it or for some other reason, and then EPA and OSHA come out and say there's no problem. And what that does is it just breeds distrust and sadness about our government. It doesn't make me change my opinion that I was just exposed. And I think that there is a way to do the sampling right, and we're trying to work with EPA to do that. But there's no question in my mind that people are absolutely being exposed on shore. And again, I could give you a stack of phone numbers.
But is there any data? I presume that you mentioned that DEQ and EPA do have monitors out there. What do their monitors show?
Some of their monitors do show fairly significant amounts of benzene in the air, which is a Class A carcinogen. So there is an amount of data that is showing that there's a problem. There's other data that is being collected absolutely in the wrong places. And the problem is that the EPA then uses this data to extrapolate to an entire region. So for example, they would have an air monitor at the Washington Monument and then use that data to say that the air in this room is fine. Well, all that monitor tells you is that the air at the Washington Monument is fine.
So is the EPA incompetent? Or?
I don't think they're incompetent. I think they're working hard. I think that they need a new model for air monitoring, and doing something new is always scary.
Because it seems so apparent to you, but why is it so inapparent to them?
Because I think it's a new model, and I've spent time with the administrator. I think they're not very comfortable, for example, giving Mr. Lambert an air monitor for his house, but they should be, because he could be a partner on the ground to take a sample. I mean, he's a smart man. He knows how to use equipment. It's just a new model that they would be uncomfortable with.
I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Louisiana. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate it. And thank you for allowing me to be on the panel. Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. I really appreciate it very much. I'm proud to represent portions of Florida's Gulf Coast and realize the economic societal benefits of both recreational and commercial fishing. This industry generates $11 billion in Florida and $50 billion nationwide. I have grave concerns about the implications of the Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill on this dynamic industry. While our top focus must remain on stopping the flow of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, we must also begin looking at the long-term impacts that this disaster will have on the ecosystems and our economy, and discuss solutions. Mr. Williams, welcome, and thank you so much for your leadership at the Southern Shrimp Alliance, and I'm proud to say that we're both from Tarpon Springs, Florida. I know you're here to relay the fear, concerns, hopes, and wishes of local shrimpers who have helped provide billions of dollars a year in revenue for Florida. You shared with me prior to today's hearing a real concern you have about BP's use of toxic dispersants. I know you sent a letter to NOAA and the EPA and have been trying to get an answer from them about the implications of the long-term impacts that dispersants will have on the shrimping industry. I questioned NOAA earlier today regarding that very issue. However, I received an unsatisfactory response, really no answer. It is alarming to me that the government agencies tasked with protecting our natural resources, in fact, are clueless to the effects of toxins that they pre-approved. Because one of the primary concerns is seafood safety, I'm hoping that you might be able to offer some insight regarding the use of dispersants. I know you can only speculate because the government is not sharing information, but do you think fish species and seafood safety would be in less peril had disbursements not been used? And the rest of the panel also is welcome to comment.
I certainly do. Certainly I'm not a scientist, but, we sent our letter early on May 5th, and that was prior to their incredible amount of dispersants being used. I think since then they have used another 1 million gallons of this dispersant. We sent a letter voicing our concerns that, you shouldn't, if you're going to use something that you have no science or no data, you shouldn't try to mitigate one disaster by creating another one. And that's exactly what they did. They told us early on that oil would not reach the shores. It did. They told us, now they're telling us dispersants are not that toxic. They can be used. They're not. We have federal agencies reluctant to call the, whatever they want to call it, plumes of oil down there. The fact is, it's there. It's been proven. The data is there to prove it, but they're still reluctant to admit that this is a problem. It is a problem. It will be a problem not only for decades, but we feel generations. And I don't know how you go about cleaning it up, but the dispersants have been used. They continue to be used, which they shouldn't. And at one point, EPA advised BP to use a less toxic dispersant. BP just basically refused, said no, that we're going to continue using this. This is the most effective. It was pre-approved by EPA, so we can use it. But yes, to your question, I believe we have created a disaster that we will not be able to address for many, many years, possibly generations, by the use of these dispersants.
Anyone else like to comment?
Why would they use the dispersants in the first place, if not to hide the fact that the oil is here and it's coming? If we could clean it off the surface, why not let it come to the surface? No one knows for sure the long-term effects because they haven't gave us the percentage of the compounds that are in it. But there's biotechnology that eats oil. There's so many different high-tech and private sector things that they can do, and no one is using anything. And the whole thing is out of sight, out of mind. From the tar balls coming in under the water to the dispersants hiding the oil, the whole thing is a sleight of hand show.
Well, thank you very much. As a follow-up, your previous answer suggests that you have been frustrated in trying to have dialogue with the government officials, whether it's NOAA, EPA, the Coast Guard, or the Department of Interior. Do you believe, and this is for the entire panel, do you believe there's a deliberate effort to shut you and the entire fishing industry out of the conversation? I know they're not encouraging you.
I don't believe, because I testified in Galliano at when the Secretary Salazar and Napolitano were in, and Secretary Salazar actually got up and made BP come to the Louisiana Charter Boat Association and negotiate. And on the first negotiation, Senator Landrieu came to it at a restaurant, and she told BP, she said, the law states that you have to pay net profit. But net profit's the law, and I'll make the law. And I'm not in the mood for net profit. That's not making these people whole. You need to come and negotiate and find a better way. So
Anyone else?
Didn't support.
Yes, I wouldn't. I don't know if I would go as far as say it's a deliberate attempt to shut us out. But the fact is, they have shut us out for whatever reason. I don't know, but they have shut our industry out. They have not responded to us. They are missing a great opportunity to allow industry to have input on all these actions and decisions, and to date, they have not allowed us to do that.
Give me some ideas on how the federal government can partner with the local fishing industries.
Well, as far as seafood safety and testing, we have basically an unlimited resource out there. The boots on the ground, if you will. If they would just come to us, form a coalition or a task force, if you will, to involve industry, because these folks, it's pretty obvious that they cannot do this alone. We are probably the best environmental stewards of our resource that there is out there. We have to make a living off that resource, and we know it better than anyone. They just can't make these decisions without involving us, because we can do this. We as far as seafood testing, cleanup, we have thousands of boats can be involved in the cleanup process. There are a few hundred now, but there can be more. But keep us involved. But when we're working on the cleanup, at least provide us with the adequate safety gear that we need to keep these folks from getting sick. I have horrific stories of folks that are getting sick on these boats. Members, our organization members, directors are on these boats. They're getting sick. Innovative gear technology. Where there's a move underway now from the industry to try to come up with a trawl that could possibly work to clean this subsea oil out, or subsurface oil out of the Gulf. We're working on it. That's what we do as an industry. We were involved from day one with the turtle excluder devices. That came from industry. You have to involve us to make sure that this works. Don't just sit back and have three agencies make decisions that impact us, and when they can use us as a resource, and these decisions will be better and a lot quicker.
Anyone else any suggestions from the rest of the panel?
What we've done to Louisiana is equivalent to someone coming to you and saying, let's levee off the Everglades to where no fresh water can get to it, and just let it starve to death. So the biggest thing to fix this is to bring nature back to itself. But in the interim, while we're losing year class after year class until the dispersants and the oil are gone, we could have hatcheries like the CCA gentleman David had mentioned. They have hatcheries to put those year classes in, so when the attrition takes the older fish and the breeders, that we don't miss a few years where there's no fish. Oysters, shrimp, everything, crabs, they could do all of it.
And it's a common dynamic when there's a problem, well, not just when there's a problem, but with the oil industry, that it's the regulators, like NOAA or EPA or whoever it is, and industry talking. It makes sense that they talk because they're supposed to be regulating them. I think they get out of the habit of including the people who are the most impacted. I see it, I can tell you, I see it every day in the work that I do. And so from my point of view, y'all could play a real service just every single time saying, where are the shrimpers, where are the fishermen? Because out of habit, they will not, out of habit and maybe something more sinister, but they will shut the people most affected out. I can tell you that as a pattern, and there needs to be a real strong movement to make sure they're included.
Very good. Thank you very much for your testimony, all of you. Appreciate it. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I think this pretty much brings our hearing to a close. I just have one quick question here before we wind up. We mentioned all the people that should be there and are not there, and those that are there. National Guard, have you seen them in?
Yeah, there's a lot of guard there, and they're working very, very hard to bring the sandbags. When you say the helicopters are bringing, you have 18-wheelers bringing them, and you have guys fill them. I mean, they're working very hard in 96-degree weather with 100% humidity. They're doing a good job.
What states are these National Guards from?
All over.
All the Gulf states?
Mostly Louisiana National Guard at this point, but
right.
Some of them are from different, some of the higher-ups.
Because I know they played an important role in Hurricane Katrina as well.
They did indeed.
Well, I thank the third panel for your long stay here up on the Hill all morning and most of the afternoon, and all of the witnesses for their participation in the hearing today. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you, and we will ask that you respond to these in writing. In addition, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days for anyone who would like to submit additional information for the record. If there is no further business before the subcommittee, The chairwoman thanks the members for their participation here this morning, and also the members of the subcommittee who have participated in the hearing. And the subcommittee now stands adjourned.